Welcome everyone to Train Tuesday. So glad to have you with us tonight. And if you've guessed if it's hot here in central Illinois, well, you'd be correct. It is very hot. We're hitting some unprecedented temperatures, but we're going to work through it tonight and talk about Genesis DDA 40Xs, as well as some covered hoppers by Pullman Standard. But before we get started, let's do what we always do. Let's run out there and get some shout outs to see who is joining us tonight. We have Donnie, Derek, BN Green 1970, Glenn, Sid, Anthony, J. Cure, KCG, Rail Gilbert, Dale George, Donnie Horton. Oh, let's see, Robert, Dale. Dale says hello many, many times. And let's see, Bradley as well. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. Like I said, we're going to be talking about Athearn Genesis DDA 40Xs, as well as some Pullman Standard covered hoppers tonight. And if we have time, we'll go ahead and take some of your questions and answer them live on the show. So one more time, let's see who else is joining us tonight. We have Brian Keegan, HO Scale Rail fan. We have, looks like, Flip Jr. and another Keegan. So thank you for joining us tonight. And without further ado, let's get started with another Train Tuesday. Let's go ahead and get comfortable in our workshop chairs. Let's put down the hobby knife and let's find a cool frosty beverage of our choice, and let's get started with another Train Tuesday. So like I was saying, we're going to be talking Genesis tonight. We're going to be talking about the Genesis DDA 40X. I'm going to go ahead and put the first model on our screen. Now the DDA 40X, this was built exclusively, of course, for Union Pacific by EMD between 1969 and 1971. The DDA 40X Centennial locomotives were the modern equivalent to the railroad's famed big boy steam locomotives. Now, these massive 98-foot double-engine diesels were UP's mainstay hotshot power for a decade until they were sidelined by the recession that occurred in the early 1980s. Now, they did have one last hurrah, and maybe some of you got an opportunity to rail fan them back in 1984 through 85, when 25 of them were returned to service for about a year to help relieve a power shortage that was happening at the time. So really impressive locomotive. And we're offering a couple of these. And the first one I've got shown here, this is number 6900. This was representative of the locomotive as it appeared in 1969 throughout the early 1970s. Interesting thing about this locomotive, it's the only DDA 40X to be built without class lights on the long hood, and it was delivered in time for the Golden Spike Centennial celebration, thus earning the series the moniker Centennial. So that's how it got its name. This model represents the as-delivered appearance, and currently this locomotive still does exist. It is preserved and prominently displayed in Omaha, Nebraska, alongside Big Boy 4023. So this is the first one that we'll be offering this month. You have until July 29th, which is a Friday, the end of the day, to place pre-orders on anything that we talk about tonight. Up next, this is part of our Prime for Grime series. This is 6901. Another unique locomotive, slightly different from 6900. This one has a unique chicken wire style radiator grills on the long hood for both the prime movers. Now, the only DDA 40X equipped like this, and 6901 is prime for grime to match its last year's in service appearance. So if you are modeling the mid 80s and if you want to do that last hurrah, this would be the perfect model for that. Likewise, late 70s, you know that these guys definitely for almost a decade did a lot of heavy running as their hot shots. And so having them in this condition would not be surprising. Now, fortunately, number 6901 is currently preserved and it's on display in Idaho. So if you want to see this in actuality, you can definitely see either one of these locomotives preserved and on display. Now, if you're asking me questions right now, I want to remind everybody when I'm going through these screens like this, I don't see your comments. Let's wait till the end of the section of the models that we're talking about, and I will review questions and try to catch them. All right, coming up next is 6905. Now, this was previously released by Athearn a while ago, but this one is different. It has a set of grills that were mismatched with the traditional grill. So it was kind of a neat calling feature. We wanted to update the model and bring that to you once again. Now, the next model is one that has, since we've introduced it the last week of June, we have gotten two sets of folks that either absolutely love this or absolutely can't stand it. And it's a modeler's preference. I get that. But we wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. Now, our legendary liveries, as I said before, they're not just strictly based on whims and fancy. Sometimes we actually do some research and we find information that leads us to the conclusion that this locomotive may have appeared like this. A recent example are the SD80 Max in the C&W paint scheme. That almost happened. We all know why it did not happen, but there were orders set forth from the Chicago Northwestern to EMD. EMD was going to build those SD80s. Of course they did, but they did not arrive on the property in C&W paint. So this is the same thing with this model here. Now, first, a little bit about the model, and then I'll talk about what our developers found when they were doing the research on this. This is the first DDA 40X. It's number 6900. But we're offering it in this paint scheme, and we're offering it with this caboose, a Genesis CA10 caboose. Now, this had an almost significantly different story. After success with earlier EMD double-engine platforms, the call went out for the next generation of diesels. Thus, the DDA 40X was the answer. And the X in the DDA 40X refers to new equipment, experimental electrical systems, which became the basis of EMD's most successful series of locomotives, the Dash 2s. If you're familiar with how locomotives by EMD were produced up until this point, it was quite different, especially if you were one of those folks that had to work on these locomotives. The Dash 2 was revolutionary for its time, and it really came up with a much easier way to maintain locomotives in a modular type setup. This improvement allowed for a long and notable career for the Centennials. As the United States, however, approached its 200th birthday, many railroads began painting a selection of their fleet in patriotic-inspired liveries. As the story is told, and this is what our researchers have found, Union Pacific had Chester Mack design a sublatory paint scheme for the first DDA 40X to be produced. This proposed livery was brought to the decision makers and was decided against by one single vote. So think about that for a second. This could have happened. One single vote is the reason why it did not. Had things gone differently that day, we would have seen something much like this. Now remember too, Union Pacific didn't really have a bicentennial locomotive. So as I said, this was brought before the decision makers. It was turned down by a single vote, but with permission by Union Pacific, Athearn has recreated this most legendary of legendary liveries. The bicentennial DDA 40X collector set, which you see here, includes Athearn's own interpretation of a Chester Mack-inspired bicentennial painted CA10 caboose, as well as the DDA 40X. Both the DCC sound-equipped and the DCC-ready DDA 40X locomotives will come with a caboose that's equipped with an NCE decoder and DCC light decoder, which operates on both DCC and DC. One thing I do want to let you know, even if you buy the sound locomotive, the caboose will not have sound. Both cabooses will have an NCE decoder with lighting functions. So wrapping this segment up, let's talk about some of the features of the Genesis DDA 40X. Some of these are recent developments from previous releases. The beacon that you see on the cab, this is a flash function that will work if you get the Tsunami 2 version. If you get the DCC ready, it'll be up to you to get the right decoder with the amount of functions to make that actually operate. But if you get it with the Tsunami 2, it will work. This also will feature illuminated truck lights. Illuminated classification lights were equipped. Remember, not all of them are going to have the classification lights. They will have illuminated number boards, see-through walkways, and 4 cube speakers. We did that with the U50. We're going to do that with this locomotive too. It's only proper to put that many speakers into this big beast. Now, for those of you that have home layouts in the HO scale, probably wondering what's the best radius for this locomotive to run on. Minimum radius on this is actually 24 inches. However, that being said, a recommended radius would be 28 inches. So not a lot of DDA 40Xs that we're offering because we're kind of piggybacking on a release that we did earlier in the year. But we did want to offer this really interesting Chester Mack inspired bicentennial. Now, we did talk with Tony Cook and Shane Mason, Model Railroad News, last Friday for our Athearn Extra. It was a special bicentennial red, white, and blue episode. And you can go ahead and go to our YouTube channel and check that out. It's archived over there if you missed out on Friday's episode. And Tony had some interesting information about this specific locomotive as well as other bicentennial locomotives. So quickly, I'm going to go over to the comments section now that my screen is open. I'm going to see if anybody has any questions. One thing I want to tell you folks, I consistently see your suggestions for different railroads, different models, different paint schemes, things of that nature. And while I do appreciate that you're watching the show and sending me those comments, your best line of effort is used through our email system. Now, our email system for product suggestions can simply be found at athearn.com with the Contact Us page, and you'll see Athearn product suggestions at athearn.com. Go ahead and shoot those over to there. They go straight to the developers, and they are collated, and that does sometimes dictate what we will do for our next set of releases. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Going through the comments and questions. Derek really likes our Prime for Grime version. Yeah, that's definitely indicative of what that locomotive would have looked like at some point. And the Prime for Grime continues to be one of our more popular offerings. Let's see. Brian says, not a UP guy, but that does look pretty sweet. Yeah, if you look over my shoulder, you'll see I've got one from the last release. And, you know, personally, I am not a Western modeler, but there's something cool about this locomotive. And it really does go back to a time when both GM and, or EMD rather, and Elco, not so much, but GE was starting to make some inroads into EMD's profit. And so we started seeing a horsepower war, and it was an interesting time. And it's kind of neat too. If you enjoy, you know, seeing technology, you know, just keep getting better and better, this is a good era to look at. And again, the DDA 40X definitely paved the way for modern locomotives. Let's see. Big Stick says, that's a good looking paint scheme. I don't get why people get so upset by legendary liveries. Those people need to settle down. Well, there's a couple of different things. I mean, all of us, there's model railroading is a large community. There are some of us that prefer to be a prototype modeler, and there are some of us that maybe we want to model a railroad that's been a favorite of ours that got merged off years ago, and we want to take a different route. I could certainly say that about the CB&Q or the Boston and Maine. The reason why we do these is, again, especially with a release like this, it's not strictly fiction. Again, this was turned down by only one vote. We're just kind of giving you a plausible explanation of what could have happened. And if you want to go that path, you can. Now, I have heard comments on social media saying that we're wasting our efforts and it's causing us from doing other different locomotives, and nothing could be further from the truth. For every legendary liveries locomotive, we're still offering prototype locomotives based on actual prototypes and actually did exist. So we're serving two different markets there. We're not going to lose sight of the prototype-minded individual. it's one of those things where if it's just not your cup of tea, well, don't worry. Next month we will probably have something that is. So it's kind of like a radio show. I tell you every time. Let's see what else we have. I'll paraphrase. Lewis has got a question. Why do we do a lot of older locomotives? Well, one of the things that Athearn's been doing in the last year is not only are we offering locomotives and freight cars that we've done in the past, but we're continually updating those. If you watch our social media feed, you'll see that there have been refinements in the molding process, or they get additional detail. We're not standing still. Just because we're releasing a locomotive that we've done before doesn't mean that we're just sitting still. We're definitely putting refinements into these locomotives, and the DDA 40X is no exception. All right. Trying to see if there's any other comments for... Scott's got a good question here. He's talking about the DDA 40X. Where did you guys find the original drawings for the bicentennial? So this was something that we had found out about. One of our researchers on board had found out about this information, did a little bit of digging, did some more digging, and it concluded that it was best to contact Union Pacific. Now, we couldn't have done this without Union Pacific's approval. So it is based on actual documentation that we have seen, that our researchers have found. Is it exactly how that locomotive would have appeared? I can't say that it would be. We're basing it on what information we have. And again, we did work very closely with UP on that locomotive, even though it's a legendary livery. Okay. I got one last comment that I'll address by Zane. He's like, hey, the truth is some of us don't want to model the UP BNSF or those Eastern roads. I want to model SP, and that died in 88, so it's worth it. More Black Widow. Well, Zane, for every person like you that says more Black Widow, I have 3 guys behind you asking for more Chinese Red and CB&Q or Southern Green. It's like I say every time. We try to offer as many models as we can for the popular roads that are based on the comments that we see, based on the product suggestion emails that we get. And we try to mix it up. We want to make sure that we're covering all of Canada, and now we're even starting to dip into Mexico, south of the border roads. So we're trying to do a little bit for everybody. So if your road is not mentioned this month, stay tuned. It will probably be up very soon, but I appreciate your comment. All right. Well, let's go on to the next item that we're going to talk about tonight. And this is good for any of you guys that are modeling 1950s all the way up into the 80s and sometimes the 90s with a little bit of weathering. You could do some wonders on these guys. I'm talking about the Pullman Standard covered hoppers. Now, these are also by Genesis. And we're going to go over a few different variants of one road in particular tonight. But Pullman Standard pretty much has dominated the covered hopper scene beginning all the way back in the 1950s. Now, remember, before that, a lot of the commodities that were shipped in covered hoppers were actually shipped in boxcars that had been retrofitted for whatever material would be used in transport. Now, thanks to the design success of their PS2 series of covered hoppers, they hit the market and exploded. And they really saw their peak in the 1960s into the 1970s. Now, these 2893s were designed to carry bulk commodities, mainly grain, but they also carried cement and plastic pellets. And these cars roamed the rails of North America for decades, attesting to the utilitarian functionality. So needless to say, it doesn't matter what necessarily what era, other than maybe ultra modern modelers, or what part of the country that you model, you're probably going to want one of these in your fleet. So let's talk about some of the ones that we're offering this month, and then we'll go over some of the features. The first one we have here is a chassis system. It's a CNO. It's lettered for the CNO 2052. The reason why I'm showing all three of the chassis is because there are subtle differences in the artwork, and you'll kind of see as I switch screens, the position of their logo and sometimes their lettering changes. Chassis system was a really interesting railroad, and these are great for anybody that's doing early 1980s, just before the CSX became into existence. The next one that we have here, another CNO car, still done up for the chassis. This is number 2063, again, 1980s era, early 1980s. Now, since the chassis was made up of also the Western Maryland and Baltimore and Ohio, we are offering the Baltimore and Ohio 628-038. And if you look, you can see, I'll go back again, you can see the difference in the logo. You can see the different layouts. Very subtle differences, but I want you folks to be aware of this because our researchers spend a lot of time going through documentation and pictures. Let's take a look at the B&O car and see some of the differences. The chassis logo is centered. You'll see that it's got the COTS label here. If I go to the CNO before that, you see some of the same information, but this one still has its ACI panel. Lastly, this one, totally different location for a lot of its information. And I know some of you may be thinking, well, by 1980s, Jim, the ACI labels were pretty much gone, weren't they? And, you know, funny thing is I still see them when I rail fan occasionally. They might not use the system anymore, but they are still out there in some capacity sometimes. And these cars are no different. So if you're modeling the 1980s, you're definitely going to see setups like this. Now, the next one I want to show you, there's been a little bit of concern on our social media, and there's been some questions and comments, and myself as a CB&Q modeler, I did kind of raise an eyebrow at this. This is CB&Q 8507. Now, a couple of things I do want to mention is it has been brought to the attention of our researchers. This car did actually exist as you see it here. However, that picture that was used for the artwork of this car was actually from Pullman Standard. It was very common for Pullman Standard to take simple black and white pictures of their latest freight cars. And if you look carefully, you'll see that the Burlington route isn't really the logo they normally use. It's kind of a stenciled version of it. That's because it was a publicity photo and trying to gain more customers. They wanted the freight car to look like a legitimate in-service car, but they would use this type of stenciling just to give that effect. Once CB&Q actually took possession of these cars, they were a different color. They went to their traditional logos, and these were actually ended up getting rebuilt in the mid-60s at Havelock and then becoming the color black, as well as some other upgrades. We're going to be offering them as they were delivered to the CB&Q. And we are working with the CB&Q Historical Society. We've reached out to them to get a little bit more information since these Pullman Standard style cars never really saw revenue service. By the time they got to the CB&Q, they were more of an oxide red with their traditional markings. Now, one of the things I want to point out with this is this shows you how much research our guys have to do. But we also appreciate everybody that's reached out to us and asked the question, hey, is this exactly how these CB&Q cars are? And a lot of you have actually given us some great information, and that's the beauty of the era in which we live in. Rather than have this car produced and maybe not be up to the expectations of our customer, we still have time to fix it and make it correct. And so we want to thank everybody that's reached out to us in your help. And we will have these updated at some point, and we will distribute those new images on our Facebook page in the coming future. So here's another one that we've offered. And again, we're starting to delve a little bit deeper into those railroads south of the border, mainly because the demand is there. And so we wanted to offer the Grupo Cementos Mexicanos freight cars. We're offering these in 3 road numbers. And this is good for your late 1980s modelers. So this fits an era that has been highly requested. And again, it's a railroad that we're starting to see more people request. So we wanted to offer this for you guys. Turning the clock back a little bit, we're going to go back to the 1950s, 1957 to be exact, is the Milwaukee Road as delivered. This car here is Milwaukee Road 98008. We're offering it in 2 other road numbers so that you can build your Milwaukee Road fleet. And somebody said something about Southern Pacific earlier. Well, if you need freight cars, I hope you're happy. Here is one of 3 Southern Pacific cars that we're going to be offering. This car here is 1960s is when this car was popular with the Southern Pacific. Again, we're going to offer this in 3 different road numbers. And then last but not least, got to have the Cotton Belt. These Cotton Belt cars are going to go a little bit further back in time than the SP. These are 1955. So these are when these Pullman Standards 2893s were virtually brand new. So a little bit about the detail that we've done with these cars. Now again, these are Genesis cars, so they're going to feature the utmost detail. These are perfect for you folks out there that have a home layout, or maybe you have access to a really nice club layout. They might sit really well on a club layout. But these feature details such as separately applied round roof hatches. That's what the 2893s predominantly had. Photo etched metal roof walk. Factory applied wire grabs all the way around. Nothing's molded on. All the outlets that are on the bottom, it's kind of hard to tell from the artwork because we're looking at a one-dimensional art piece. But if you were to look at the finished product, they're all going to have detailed outlets. They're all going to include 33-inch solid nickel silver wheels with the RP25 contour, and that means they will operate on all popular brands of track, both Flex and Snaptrack. Minimum radius that you'd want to run these on is 18 inches. You wouldn't want to go any smaller than 18. There's going to be other details to them as well that and these details are known for being in the Genesis series. These are going to have coupler lift bars, train line hoses, brake hoses, hardware, and then don't forget they will have a fully detailed underframe that will include the air brake reservoir, control valve, brake cylinder, and all the associated plumbing and brake rod details. So these are great cars for your home layout, especially if you're at the point now where your home layout is nearing completion and you're starting to do some operations. These really set the era and the time in which you're modeling. So we tried to offer cars that fit a number of different eras, and we tried to get cars from all over, not only the United States, but also south of the border. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and see what kind of questions we may have out there. So I'm going to go through the comments here and see if there are any questions on the 2893 hopper cars, or if you thought of something for the DDA 40Xs. Here's your time. We'll have a little bit of time to take those questions. Let's see. A couple of guys really happy. Harold is very happy about the Southern Pacific and Cotton Belt. Yeah, those are cool roads. And Harry Wong, you probably know Harry from RMC, associate editor over there at Railroad Motor Craftsman. He would know these 2893s ran into the 1980s on both the Cotton Belt and the Southern Pacific. So there you go. You can definitely justify if you're wanting to run those roads in the 80s. Randall really likes the Mexican hopper. Yeah, the colors, the stripes really do pop on that. It really is cool. Really like that. That's probably going to be something that I'll have to think about getting. Lewis is asking predominantly about the CB&Q. What is the stenciling? I love it. So if you look carefully at the CB&Q car, typically the CB&Q had a red, white, and black bordered rectangle with the Burlington route name featured inside that rectangle. In this case, since it was a builder's photo, they just simply had dashed lines to show the square and then the Burlington route within that. And it basically looks like a stencil. They would just hold a stencil, a paper or cardboard stencil template up to the car and spray black on there. So that's why it's a monotone color of gray and black, and it has those dashes around the rectangle. Let's see what other questions we have. Home layout nearing completion. Layouts are never complete. You always find something you want to change or add. Yes, that is true, but you know what I mean. You're going to get to a point at some point where you've got most of your scenery down, most of your buildings down. Before you change your mind, you're probably going to want to get some operations in. But very true. They don't just stop. Casey's got a vote for the Legendary Liveries DD40AX. Yeah, I mean, I think some of it too may depend on your age. If you're somebody of my age or older, that definitely looks good. I know some of the younger guys think that is a rather gaudy paint scheme, but that was indicative of that era of locomotive paint. If you go back and do a search for bicentennial locomotives, there were some that were even more strange than that. In fact, do yourself a favor and look up the Athearn Extra that we did Friday night with Tony Cook and Shane Mason. And Tony shares some really cool pictures of bicentennial units, and some of those paint schemes held up well. They aged well. Some of them did not. So just kind of take a look at it. I mean, remember in the 70s, some of us were wearing leisure suits, so some things don't age well. BN Green 1970 has a great comment that I want to post. He says, personally, I'm not a big fan of the Legendary Liveries. However, if folks are buying them and they make it possible for Athearn to have the volume to run certain items, then wonderful. And that's a good comment, BN. That does allow us to go a little bit deeper into locomotives or sometimes freight cars that we would not normally be able to do. We wouldn't be able to justify bringing them to you. But by doing the Legendary Liveries, and so far, our Legendary Liveries have sold very, very well. We understand that not everybody's an operator. There are some folks out there that like to collect for different reasons. But the Legendary Liveries do sell well, and you're right. It does allow us to go deeper into the prototype stuff. And if you're a prototype guy, you're going to have many things to be thankful for as the year goes on. Terry, I guess that's depending on how you and your operators operate. Now, that being said, my favorite operating series of cars is probably the Athearn cars. They have just as much detail detail where it counts. And if I am working with younger modelers, I have no problem running some roundhouse models because they don't really care about the detail. They just want to have fun doing some operating. So it just depends on your individual results. Let's see, any other questions or comments? Anthony wants to know, were those hoppers used in grain service? Oh, yes, absolutely they were. They were used in grain service. They were used in cement service, any type of bulk, even plastic pellets. If you know of a plastic manufacturer in your area, you look and you'll see, nowadays you'll see more of the modern covered hoppers. But no, these were used for grain, cement. I mean, just to name some of the more common things. Brian wants to know, when will the hoppers be available for pre-order? They are available for pre-order right now. So as soon as your hobby shop opens tomorrow morning or whenever you're watching this broadcast, you have until Friday, July 29th to place your pre-orders. But that's open throughout the month of July. And you can pre-order through the dealer of your choice. And they should be here by August of next year. Frederick wants to know, are these offered in just 3 packs or 3 different numbers. They are available as 3 individual different road numbers. So 3 different cars. Each railroad is going to have 3 singles. All right. I got time for one more question, and then we will sign off for tonight. Let you guys get back to some work on the layout or your projects. Let's go with Thomas's question. He wants to know, what about Great Northern or Northern Pacific Genesis cabooses in the future? So your best bet, again, is to go to our product suggestion email. That's Athearn product suggestions at athearn.com. And that would probably actually be one of the easier things that we could do in the future, since we have offered cabooses in the Genesis series of the ICC company. So a little bit of refinements, a little bit of work, it could be done. It does depend on how much feedback we get from you guys. If we think there's a strong need there, then we will definitely fulfill that. But if you want to get a shot at seeing those in the future, that's your best route to go. Derek asking, Jim, why is it take so long to order? I'm not sure what you mean, because as far as pre-order, let's just go through the process quickly, and I'll let you guys get back to your workshops. So if you see something tonight or something we've talked about on Train Tuesday for the month of July, and you want to pre-order it, all you need to do is contact your dealer. Now, your dealer could be a standard brick and mortar, or you may have a preferred dealer that's online. Either way, you can contact them and say, hey, I want one of these. And they will place a pre-order with Athearn directly. Now, it takes a year, just a little bit over a year, for all those orders to come in. And then the factory gets the final artwork. The factory builds the models. And keep in mind, too, that when they are doing all this work, our developers' work isn't done. Our developers have to check everything that comes out of the factory, make sure everything is accurate to their notes and to their historical data. And once everything is good on that end, they go ahead, they get into production, and then they are shipped. And sometimes the shipping does take a little bit longer than what we'd like it to, but typically we try to keep a good eye on when those are going to be in. And typically after you pre-order, you've got about a year and a couple of months sometimes to wait for your item. So I hope that answers your question on how the pre-orders work and why it seems to take a little bit longer. We are, again, experiencing some shipping delays, so keep in mind on that. All right, I have talked to you folks long enough. I am going to let you get back to your modeling. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Remember, we are on all the social media platforms, including TikTok. You can find us on YouTube. Go on over there, check out our newest video. Athearn Extra went up on Friday night. You can always like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos that'll drop in, usually on a weekly basis. And if I don't see you at a train show, I will see you next week on Train Tuesday. Until next time, everybody, have a good evening, stay cool, and high greens. Good night.